Hello from Blue Willow Bookshop in Houston, Texas. Hi, friends, it's me. So, you know me, I'm Cathy from Blue Willow Bookshop. My colleagues and I are honored to host this virtual event celebrating the publication of Alexis Hall's novel, Hell's Heart, published by our partners at Tor Books.
Hello, hi.
Hi there.
I'm glad the little book thing has worked out nice. So that's really cute.
Yes, isn't that fun? I
It's
can,
so
like,
fun.
there, look, it's right
Oh,
next
it's
to me.
actually right to you. Oh, that's oh, you're ruining the magic.
I know. Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Um, but I'm so glad. Okay, first of all, everybody, here, look, got my Hell's Heart manicure.
Very
There we
nice.
go. Very fun. Um, I also, Mary, in the background, your social media has been such a delight. I love the little Jellycat and the Jellycat adjacent plushies that were on um, social media. They're so much fun. So you're really great, Mary. Also, before we go any further, that audio by Charlie and Dolores is amazing.
So good.
So good. It was a delight to listen to that. What a voice. You also had incredible interviews with the Fantasy Hive and Swords and Sapphics. They're so fantastic.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. Also, friends who are um, listening, watching, the Swords and Sapphics post in particular has some great book and media recs, and we will send those links with the follow-up email because I'm always happy to see what Alexis is enjoying, and I think you will too. Okay. I would never have read, I wouldn't say never. I'm not typically a sci-fi person.
Hmm.
And before this book, I read the children's illustrated version of Moby Dick to prepare.
That's beautiful. Is it bridged or is it like?
It's abridged. Oh, it's definitely abridged. It's maybe like 200 pages, but I got,
Yeah,
got the
yes.
gist of it. Um, and then I printed out my Moby Dick character list
Very
from Spark Notes so I could take notes on it.
nice.
And then I read this book
Nice.
and I really, really enjoyed it. I had
Well, I'm
so
glad.
much fun reading it and I felt so comfortable in it because you had written it, so I felt like I was in good hands.
Oh, thank you.
It was so much fun. Um, okay, so it's Moby Dick, but it's so much more.
Yes. Oh, that's a complex. Moby Dick's quite a lot in and of itself.
It is, but like there are more layers in this book than there are layers in the cake on the cover of Paris Delacourt.
That's very fair.
Um, so I's voice was so singular. I absolutely adored her.
Oh, thank you.
Um, Q, what a tender and wise badass.
Hmm.
And I had my phone next to me the whole time using Google Translate. But that was also like, that was so much, reading this book was such an experience for me. I completely enjoyed it. And it was so cinematic. I could really see this one in my head.
Fantastic.
And I need to continue to think about that. Like, I'm sure part of it, if not all of it, is because of the incredible world building you did.
Oh, thank you.
So on the note of world building,
Yes.
was there a particular part uh, in particular that you really enjoyed creating, like the creatures or the science of Jupiter or the ship design or how the boats functioned? Was
I
there?
think I think what I liked is the high-low mix. If you
Yeah.
sorry, high-low mix is actually a term I picked up from watching a lot of Ukraine war analysis. Um, but like because it very deliberately veers between quite detailed, almost hard SF, and I would only ever say almost hard SF because while I do have a science background, like I'm not. I think the level of hardness of the hard SFE bits, I think I would say is I acknowledge that gravity is stronger on Jupiter, but I didn't bother to actually work out how the strength of gravity varies as you descend down through the atmosphere of Jupiter, because I think it should, because of like so gravity follows an inverse square law, but obviously planets aren't really just a point with all their mass concentrated at the center. So if you're on like on the surface of Earth. got gravity of 9.81 meters per second squared. And if you dig down under the Earth, because more of the mass of the Earth is above you, gravity gets less as you go down.
Okay.
And that's true on any planet of uniform density, but Jupiter isn't of uniform density because it's gaseous, so the gas is denser in the middle. So that level I didn't go into. Um,
Right.
but but I do pay attention to the fact that the gravity is is higher, and that the temperature, the variation of temperature profile of the air is something that I did take into account.
Okay.
Um, but also there's psychic flying space whales, so it's a mix. I think in terms of like part my sort of favorite world building note in that regard is there's a line quite early on where I talks about the past and the biblical past particularly because of his very religious background, and she talks about how if you spoke to one of the church fathers, if you spoke to like kind of Jonah, say, about what she does for a living, and you talked about being light hours away from Earth and being inside a storm the size of a planet, that would make no sense. You'd have no frame of reference for it. But if you said, and also I fight giant monsters, you'd be like, oh yeah, we have stories about that. And obviously that's sort of a joke, but it's sort of attempting to address something about the nature of the universe and the nature of the science aspect of science fiction, because there's a lot of ways in which the reality of particularly space stuff is so much more remarkable and miraculous than stuff you can just make up.
Oh yeah.
Like there's like actual like and the the bits where I've paid attention to the hard side of hard SF are the bits where paying attention to the hard side of hard SF makes it cooler, essentially, because it's really cool when you actually think about what a gas giant is. It's absurd, there's a famous Douglas Adams quote which goes like, space is big, really big. You may think it's a long way down the shop to the chemist, but that's just peanuts compared to space. And like, and that's the thing. Like, if there is one thing to take away from this book, it's that Jupiter is big, like really big. Like you might think it's a long way down the shops to the chemist, etc.
Yeah. No, I love that. I love that. Okay, just a side note on the creatures.
Mhm.
Those worms were so disgusting.
Really? Oh, don't be
Oh,
mean.
no, there's there's a scene during the harvesting
Hmm.
when they're all actively, I don't want to spoil anything, but that was very challenging to read. Ugh.
I could see if you're not into like it's one of those funny ones, right? I don't know how like difficult the book would be for people who have like thalassophobia issues.
Yeah.
Because obviously it's not literally in the sea, but it's got a lot of sea-like imagery. And I can see if you're not into eels, then like they could be a bit gross. Like, and obviously, like a lot of the stuff with the worms is.
The part when they're like all thumping against the ship,
Oh yeah, yeah.
that is what was so icky. So
Oh
I am
yeah,
not body shaming any worms. Worms, do
yeah.
your worm jobs. I completely appreciate that. But that moment when they're all thumping against the ship,
Yeah, yeah.
okay, I'm sorry, because now I'm going to share with you what it reminded me of. I had a friend who had a rodent infestation in her
Ooh,
attic, and they had to basically hook a hose up to the attic and suck them all out.
ooh. I
So
mean,
there
that's
was a
not the fault of
sound that
rodents.
made me think of the sound.
Ooh, yeah, yeah. Ooh,
So anyway, I
yeah.
digressed. What a surprise. Kathy digressed during an
So I
event.
think we're both very digressy people. It's fine.
Yes, we are. But like
It fills the time.
it does. But also like it was so visceral reading all of the harvesting stuff
Mm.
after reading, granted in the children's illustrated version, the harvesting stuff. But it's still like there's a lot of work to get that stuff out.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so the end, which I will not spoil, the end made me weep. Really weep. Like your books have made me cry. All y'all know that. Especially Viola and Gracewood, who I love to the ends of the earth. But this
Mhm.
one just made me weep and be so sad.
Yeah.
It was so, I mean, it was right that it should make me sad and that I should weep. It was so good.
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, no, it's. I think obviously because most of what I write is romance or romance adjacent, and so it's got almost by definition a positive ending. Whereas this is a retelling of okay, spoilers for 165-year-old
Yeah,
novel. The boat does sink at the end of Moby Dick, and it is a retelling of Moby Dick.
yeah, it's not good. It was, but like, well done, well done. Um, gosh, like those characters, Locke.
Hmm. Oh, I'm glad you like Locke.
Oh, I Locke and Q are my two favorites. I adored I. I thought A was incredibly charismatic, but Locke and Q for me were the two who
Interesting.
I just adored. Um, so now we're going to move into some of your questions, and please feel free to. Oh my God, I almost forgot. I have to show you. So I was at a bookseller convention in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, which
Oh, cool.
is uh north in more like northeast of the
Yeah, I know
US.
nothing about American geography.
So the bookstore is the White Whale bookstore, and
Oh,
look at the
cute.
sweatshirt. The
Oh,
whale
nice.
is reading a book.
Very cool.
So I had to do a show and tell with that because I bought that sweatshirt just because of Hell's Heart.
No, that's fine. I'll get onto the commission.
Like, when else do you see a whale reading a book?
Your book. No, absolutely.
So
Yeah.
it was fantastic. Okay, so I'm going to do some questions that were pre-submitted. Thank you, everybody who did that. And then we'll move to Q&A. Please remember, if you're going to submit a question in the Q&A, that it should be a question, not a comment. Um, so this is from Alicia. Having just finished Moby Dick this week in preparation for Hell's Heart, I'm fascinated by how you approach retelling source material. How much did you map out correlations ahead of time? And how much did you just let your experience of Moby Dick percolate into something new and see what kind of story came out? Were there any elements of Moby Dick you consciously decided not to bring into this version, and why?
Several questions. I'll try and get them in roughly that order.
Yep,
Um, so the intent was always for it to be a very close retelling, although I mean, in some ways the core because I'm intentionally weird. The core idea was to try and do a Moby Dick adaptation that included a lot of the stuff that perhaps sometimes gets left out of other adaptations. Because a lot of adaptations of Moby Dick will stick to what you might call the story of Moby Dick, which is, like the ship and the characters and the whale and the go and hunt the whale.
yep,
Um, but a lot of Moby Dick is just very, very odd. And like sometimes you get commentary on Moby Dick where people will look at it and be like, kind of, well, there's all this strange stuff in it. Like there's a chapter that's just cetology, and there's chapters where it's just Ishmael talking about religion, and there's chapters that it's like just going on about the history of whaling. And what people will often say is they'll say, well, obviously that's just what books were like in the 19th century, but you couldn't get away with that with a modern audience. And no, that is not what books were like in the 19th century. There are reviews from the 19th century of people just being like, what is this shit? Melville, what are you doing? Why is there a chapter that's just entirely made up cetology?
right.
So I wanted to, and this may be I do not know how many of these parallels are things you would have noticed from the illustrated edition, because I suspect a lot of them might be exact kind of things that you would cut out for an abridgment. So it's things like there is a chapter on cetology because there's a chapter just called cetology in the book. There's the one I love to talk about is there's a chapter in Hell's Heart that's just called an extended cock joke that is just I talking about the Leviathan's penis
Yep,
and kind of constantly daring the reader to call her on her bullshit. And that's really in Moby Dick. Like it's slightly less self-aware and sort of fourth wall breaky. But the Dick Cassock thing is genuinely a thing from Moby Dick. Like one of the interview questions I think you might have, if in the other interviews that you have talked about, people occasionally talk about like what's weird research you've done for a book, and basically like somewhere in my Google search history is a phrase along the lines of is the Dick Cassock thing from Moby Dick real or did Melville just make it up? Apparently the answer is that they probably would have used whale foreskin for clothing because it's quite soft and pliant, but you can't just yank the whole thing off and stick it over someone's head and make a cassock out of it like you do it in smaller strips. Um, and probably it was actually a somewhat like is Catholophobic or what? It was probably actually a sort of somewhat religiously bigoted joke about Catholicism to some extent because it was the 19th century and like a lot of Americans are weird about Catholicism in the 19th century, and still are, but even more so in the 19th century. Um, and so a lot of the stuff I really wanted to adapt was that. I did also want to quite closely mirror the whole structure, and again,
Okay.
the the ship sinks at the end. Um, like for example, there's a thing in Moby Dick where they meet a bunch of other ships. So these things called gams. It's the nine gams of the peak. What, it's nine gams? I think it's nine gams. I've lost.
Right.
I knew this when I was writing the book. I'm two books down the line now, and I've flushed all
Right.
my Moby Dick information out of my brain. And all the gams happen in roughly the order they happen in the book, and they have
Okay.
similar themes to the themes they have in the book, and the ships have the same names. Although spoiler, none of the captains called Statler and Waldorf. That's in there specifically. Obviously, it's in there as a Muppets joke, but it's in there because actually the real captains in the book have equally silly names, and they are kind of a weird comedy double act. It's a very strange chapter. Um, the There weren't that many things I like pointedly cut out. There for a while I did have a draft where I kept the bit where a prophet comes up to them. In Moby Dick the text, there's a bit where a guy called I think Elijah, after the prophet Elijah, basically comes up to them and goes like kind of, "Hey, don't get on that boat. It's extremely doomed." And they're all like, "Nah, it's fine." And I had a couple of variants where I had a scene like that in an early draft, but it brought the pacing down, so it was cut out. Um, the other thing that's was again a very conscious choice I made in the adaptation was so one of the less famous bits of Moby Dick is that there's a character called Fedallah.
Yes.
Is the even people, even Melville scholars who are very defensive of Melville's attitudes, who will very strongly say that like kind of he was very progressive for his age, etc., etc. Fridella is the one that will kind of go, no, that is just racist. That's clearly just racist.
Right.
And it's this sinister like Parsi is the language he used, which is these days means specifically like an ethnic group that lives in the Indian subcontinent is a Persian extraction. I'm not quite sure which, and those kind of terms got used in a much more general, much less nuanced way in the 19th century. Um, and my feeling when you got something like that, where it's like irreducibly racist,
Yeah.
is that you either keep the character but have them play a completely different role in the book, or you keep the role that character plays in the book, but you change what that role is played by completely.
Yep.
Because the character of Fidela in Moby Dick basically exists to be an externalization of Ahab's worst impulses, and I didn't feel that was an appropriate textual role to give to a human being, so I gave it to an AI instead. Because honestly, I think being an externalization of all our worst impulses is a really good job to give to an AI. I think that's basically what they are.
Yeah. Yeah, and it was interesting. I do I Spadala was in the Children's Illustrated version, and it
Oh, interesting.
was such I mean,
How did they handle it? Like,
not well.
is it?
I mean, this is a date. It was just like, oh.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, how is this one gonna go? So, I like that you had that AI
Hmm.
um serve that role, and I appreciate the way you handled that a lot. So I got so excited about talking about how much I liked the book that we didn't talk about like why you did this, which is the the Moby Dick reread or great read during
During COVID,
COVID.
yeah.
So
Yes,
why
indeed.
don't you, for those people who are not familiar with that, why don't you share that with the class, please?
Absolutely. So for those of you who haven't heard this story, and I tell this every time I do a thing about Hell's Heart because it's the because I never have a good book origin story. It's the one book I've ever written that's got a good origin story.
Yes.
So during COVID, lockdown happened, and I had a brilliant idea, which was I know what I'll do. I'll read a famously long book and I'll do a chapter a day so that when it gets to the end of lockdown and I haven't finished the famously long book, it will feel like it went more quickly. Because obviously
It's going to be
it's
short.
135 chapters. It's not going to be 135 days of lockdown. That would be like 4 full months. Spoiler, lockdown was substantially more than 4 full months, so Moby Dick did not last the whole time. But I did do a read along on the platform formerly known as Twitter back when it was, slightly less awful.
Right.
And it was actually a really nice experience. It kind of kept me very together during that time. It made me feel I was doing something at least moderately productive. A lot of people read along with me. We had a lot of nice conversations mostly about flukes, because good God, Melville is obsessed with flukes. He's not really obsessed with flukes. He mentioned flukes a couple of times, and obviously one of the things I did during the read along was I, tweeted out silly lines that are funny out of context because I'm a really basic person in a lot of ways. And it was just and that put Moby Dick in my head, and because I'm a professional writer, I then went to how would I do a take on this, and then I briefly toyed with do it fantasy but with dragons, but that felt a bit too obvious. So I was like, do it with space whales on Jupiter.
God. It's so like I remember when you first announced the premise of it, and I was just like, what? But it like totally works. It's
I
so
think
cool.
I'm
Um,
glad it's cool.
so there's a few comments in the chat about how beautiful this book is. This
I
book is
know.
so pretty. I'm trying to
I
like
like that you
show
just
you.
took that off what is in the context of this at my face. Like,
I'm totally destroying the magic, and I'm sorry. Um,
no, it's a beautiful cover. It's
it
absolutely
is.
wonderful.
It's just like all the colors. Please again note, look,
Yes,
look.
indeed.
Um,
If you can get the this isn't helpful obviously to you, but the UK version actually has like the inner leaves pick up it like picks up the
the
color of
end
the blood.
papers.
Yeah, the end papers like pick up the color with that same kind of lime green color. Is that lime green? Whatever the hell color that
It's
is.
it's to me, it's like a fluorescent
After the rest of the yeah,
neon
so
green.
it's
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Oh, that's
Uh,
brilliant.
Well, my UK editor cares a lot about color.
That's fantastic. I'm going to have to look at a picture of it. I will admire it from afar. That is fantastic. All right. I'm asking you the question because lots of people in the Twitter interwebs like to talk about it, and then we'll
Uh-huh.
move on to going back to talking about your stuff.
Yeah.
Will you write a sports romance because of heated rivalry?
Fair question. Um, probably not. And not. I don't want to say this in a negative way. I do sometimes do like my take on the current big trend.
Yes,
Um, but
you do.
when I do that, it's usually because I have something to say about it, or because it's something I do actually like. Like rom-com was a big trend. I love rom-com, and that worked out very well for me. Um, my understanding is that Rachel Reed, who I our Chancellor of the Exchequer is called Rachel Reeves, and she's in the news a lot recently, so I get very mixed up in my head. My understanding is that she wrote Heated Rivalry in part because she's a huge hockey fan and specifically wanted to address toxic masculinity in hockey. And my understanding is that the book and the TV series now have actually led to a lot of discussion about toxic masculinity within hockey, which is great. It's wonderful that conversation got started. Um, the thing is, I am not a sports person. It may shock you. Um, but I'm, but the other thing is
I'm so
that I'm also not the kind of non-sports person that likes to be dismissive of sport because
right.
there's a tendency sometimes a tendency in nerd culture to be sort of performatively dismissive of people who are into sports stuff because we are often um used to feeling excluded because we don't in my country follow football or in your country follow the other kind of football.
Right.
Um, but actually, you should never look down on stuff people feel passionate about, because being passionate about something is a form of vulnerability. But I don't personally really have a sport I feel strongly enough about to write a sports romance about it. Like the closest I could get would be pro wrestling, and the problem with pro wrestling is that you can't really talk about pro wrestling without talking explicitly about the WWE, and that goes to some like very complicated like
Uh-huh.
obviously about real people in a an undeniable way, kind of. place. I don't follow snooker. Like it's not a fascinating you went there, but no, it's I occasionally feel like I should get into darts because that's very like our traditional British working class thing as well. But and it had its moment, I think, briefly post Ted Lasso. Also, there's darts bars in a thing in my country now. I don't know if they're like.
Yeah, I don't know.
I think younger people are more into venues that have like stuff rather than just like pubs. Now esports. Okay, I will say esports romance that could work.
That could
But
work.
again, I don't know. I don't know enough about. I don't actually know enough about esports. Like I could do competitive Magic the Gathering.
But it's good. You know what? And I think you're right. Anything people are passionate about, let them be passionate about it.
Mhm.
I agree. Um, okay, here's a question. What's one question you've always wanted someone to ask about your books or whatever else might hugely interest you that you have never had asked?
Cool. So the first thing I would say about this question is that obviously the problem with this question is every time it gets asked, you have to come up with a new thing that's never been asked.
Right,
I am not gonna. There is literally nothing about my books hasn't been asked at this point. But in
right.
terms of other things, the question I'd like to answer is: Can you recommend some tabletop role-playing games that aren't Dungeons and Dragons? So that's what I'm gonna do now because that's something I kind of care about. Um, if you are a big fan of Dungeons and Dragons, or if you want to get into tabletop role playing because you've heard of Dungeons and Dragons but don't necessarily like the fact that it's owned by Hasbro, who have a history of directly using slave labor and sending the Pinkertons after people, um, Daggerheart is an interesting one to look into. It's the game. If you're into Dungeons and Dragons right now, there's a good chance you're a fan of Critical Role. It's the game that Critical Role kind of their game design arm made, and it's really laser designed as a good bridge if you're familiar with Dungeons and Dragons and want to try something that's close enough to it to feel familiar while also not being D&D. Um, I'm currently a big fan of Lancer, which is a utopian mech game set thousands of years in the future. Again, if you are familiar with D&D, it's got that very quite rules light for everything except combat, and the combat's really crunchy thing.
Okay.
Um, it's about it's it's about piloting giant mechs on the fringes of gay space communist utopia is the way it's sometimes described. Um, if you want something that is not super D&D derived, I'm this is a complex recommendation. I am a huge fan of Vampire the Masquerade, which is a game about being vampires. It was originally published in the 90s, and I will say it's very 90s. It has a very 90s sensibility. I will also say that personally, I actually think that, and this is a really complex one, the Chronicles of Darkness game line, which is a game the the games that the thing Vampire the Masquerade got replaced with, then got replaced with before they brought Vampire the Masquerade back.
Oh,
Yeah, it's really weird. They're by a company called Onyx Path. They've sort of semi maybe lost the license for it now because Vampire the Masquerade's come back. But they do the same premise but better. So if you look at something like Vampire the Requiem, for example, it's got better rules for being vampires, I would argue. But Vampire the Masquerade is really iconic. Um, Another classic I would recommend is Call of Cthulhu. As always, and something we might touch on later as we talk about more elements of Hell's Heart. That's specifically a Lovecraft role-playing game. So you play people investigating Lovecraftian mysteries. Obviously, Lovecraft is deeply problematic, but people who make like Lovecraft-themed content these days are super aware of that, and usually handle that stuff, you know, as well as you can, given that, for example, a lot of the source material has some weirdness to it.
yeah.
But it is a classic. And probably my favorite game of all time is Ars Magica. This one is deeply crunchy. It's specifically set in 13th century Europe. You specifically play powerful wizards in it, and it's the game that sells being a wizard the best, in my
Ooh.
experience. Like it's almost to a fault in the sense that like it's a game where you are wizards and you get better at magic by sitting alone in your tower and studying for years at a time, but it's got rules for that. And then occasionally stuff disturbs you and you have to go out and deal with it, but it
Oh.
really makes you feel like a wizard. So those are, I think, five things I would recommend.
That
Um,
is excellent. I'm taking notes on my phone because in my haste to organize everything, including the magic over here, I forgot to bring a pencil.
of course.
Um, that's fantastic. Thank you. I love that. Um, I'm gonna look at Ars Magica.
I
Anyway,
feel like it's pretty good.
Hell's Heart reminded someone more than once of your remarkable book, The Affair of the Mysterious Letter, which involves multi-layered, sporadically linked realities. While writing Hell's Heart, did you ever think of the reality of Hell's Heart as one of the myriad hinted at in The Affair of the Mysterious Letter?
So there's sort of an almost canon answer to this, which is that technically within the canon of both books, canonically, and actually canon's a difficult one. I like to use the word canon in the more like literary canon sense. So the canon is just literally what the text says, not what I think in my head. But I know, but like the my head canon, which I know a lot of people think is more important than their head canon because I'm the author, even though I believe in death of the author and therefore don't. Um, Canon in Hell's Heart is that it is set in our world, but thousands of years in the future. So if Hell's Heart is one of the realities of Affair of the Mysterious Letter, then our reality is one of the realities of Affair of the Mysterious Letter. And there are very small references in Affair of the Mysterious Letter. So first of all, there are green people from a desert world called Marvos who are definitely just Martians.
Hmm.
So our solar system clearly exists, and there's a reference to there being a planet called the Azure Star that is visible from Marvos, which is Earth. It never got explored in Affair. It might have come up if I had ever done sequels to that book. But my headcanon was always that Earth, like real Earth that we live on, does exist in that universe, but because everything's really Pulp Fiction-y, it's like Earth from like 1 million years BC.
Okay.
So
Okay.
like it's like there are stop motion dinosaurs and like kind of 1970s cavemen running around essentially.
Okay.
They are technically in the same multiverse
Yes.
because
Yes, they
sort of.
are. I love that. Um, Here's another one. Thank you for taking us along on this adventure. I concur. I love the world building, and I'm curious about how you approached it. The different religions and regions of the solar system seem like parts of a rich world filtered through the perspective of our narrator, who has had a very specific life experience. Did you have detailed behind the scenes notes about how humanity spread out over the solar system and about the different religions and corporations, or did you aim for just enough detail to serve as a backdrop for the characters?
Sort of somewhere in the middle.
Okay,
So I am not a like binders and binders and binders of things notes. Even
right,
going back to tabletop role playing games, even if I'm running a tabletop RPG, I won't have tons of world building notes, particularly because it's an interactive medium. You want players to be able to bring their own ideas to the table. But
right.
what I it's important. I always feel it's important for me to know slightly more than is in the book, but emphasis is on slightly. I don't necessarily need
Okay,
there to be tons and tons and tons and tons and tons and tons of like extra little details that I can, haul out in interviews 6 years after the fact. Um, what I often try to do is build a world that feels, the phrase I sometimes use is robust to improvisation. So to
okay,
have enough of an understanding of the core of how things work that
okay,
I can be reasonably confident that even if I make things up as I go along a bit, it will still feel consistent. In terms of like the planets and stuff, so one of the deal with the planets is that it's supposed to parallel the way in which in Moby Dick there'll be like constant references to people coming from like a specific bit of America, which I think you are supposed to have had like at least some preconceptions about in the 19th century. It's like in a reno it's like my understanding is that the song Gangnam Style like that's a specific region that people have like specific preconceptions about if they're Korean. Or like in the same way that like kind of I understand that like there's there's like specific assumptions people have now about Florida man or
Yes.
New Jersey. Hi to people from
Or
New Jersey.
or Texas.
Or indeed Texas, yes, for that matter. Um, and so I sort of had a fairly broad sense of like, okay, so Ganymede is the new money place, and like Io is one of the like kind of the is the sort of the Nantucket place. It's the place that does fishing stuff and things.
Yep.
The core world. There's always a thing in like kind of science fiction in these kind of science fiction settings where like the inner planets are like the rich ones. So it's like kind of Mercury and Venus are like where all the really really rich people are.
Oh,
Um, which I quite like, particularly because it implies that the really rich people actually live on the least hospitable planets
right.
and just throw a ton of resources at making them luxurious, which I almost
Yeah.
like as satire.
Yeah, it
Um,
is. Wow. Again, I don't know a lot about science fiction, so that's really fascinating for me to think
From
about.
the Dubai of the solar system, exactly.
Yeah, fair. Okay, another question related to that one. If you lived in this world, which planet or moon would you live on?
Oh gosh, I mean, I'd probably just live on the one I was born on and not have the resources to get off it, to be honest. Like they all kind of suck. Like the very rich people ones are nice to live on if you're very rich and horrific to live on if you aren't.
Right.
And all of the others, you're a tiny cog in a horrible late stage capitalist machine. Which bit of the dystopian society would you most like to live in? It's kind of a hard one. I
Yeah.
suppose the obvious answer is like I'd live on Earth where things are fine. Actually, spoilers,
Ooh.
because you don't have to live in
Um,
a
yeah.
dome.
Um, okay, here's another question. Were you ever tempted to try to get a slang word for genitalia into the title of the book? Or were you satisfied with the number of times that sperm was mentioned throughout the text?
That's a very fair question. Uh, so often titles do go through iterations. The only Hell's Heart, the title was always Hell's Heart because it just felt perfect for Sapphic Moby Dick in space because like it's a really iconic Moby Dick quote. Also, I appreciate this question was slightly joking, but I'm going to use it as a riff to talk about
Yeah, yeah.
um it's an iconic Moby Dick quote. It's got the word heart in it, which implies it's got a slightly more romantic vibe. Obviously, Hell's Heart is a real location and a thing. It has this sense of this sort of thing, this sort of like obviously the idea of Hell's Heart kind of hangs over at least half the novel as like a this sort of ominous thing they are moving towards. The one change, and I do think it was a good change that I was asked to make the title is when I originally pitched it, it was stylized as Hell's hyphen Heart. And the reason for this is an extremely deep cut Moby Dick joke, which is that as I believe your teachers may have insisted on reminding you in school, the book is called Moby hyphen Dick, but the whale is called Moby space Dick. And one of my editors pointed out that it just looks like a mistake if you have it, which it basically was, as my understanding is it like it was a mistake
Yeah.
in one of the editions. It also, given the composition of that we've got for the cover, like I'm really glad that there's not a hyphen in it. I think it would look really weird. I really respect the comment that Hell's Heart could be a genitalia reference if you try. I think that's very fair.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, I am going to, and I do not think the Children's Illustrated Edition addressed that. Um, so I'm going to move to a couple Q&A, some Q&A
Oh.
submitted through the Zoom. Here's a question. Did you have a favorite chapter in the book?
Sorry, in my book or in Moby
In,
Dick?
I'm sorry, I'm saying it says in the book. I'm choosing this one.
Oh gosh. As as I'm sure you know because we've done so many of these, I am terrible at favorites. I've already talked about the whale dick chapter.
Yes.
A lot of my favorite chapters are the ones that I was touch and go on whether the publisher would let me get away with putting them in, like the whale dick chapter,
Uh-huh.
like the Cystology chapter, or like there's a chapter called Fangirl,
Yep.
which is a again, it's an almost deliberate one-to-one parallel for the chapter in the original book called The Affidavit, where where um uh where Ishmael is making the case for like the importance of whaling. Only this one is making the case for it in the context of what is clearly a deeply fucked up and militarized pop culture. I will say, oh God, I will say the other thing I'll say about that chapter is that there's a lot of stuff in the book that is quite on the nose satire, and the bit where I is talking about how like kind of in her pop culture there's a lot of like valorization of armed people with jackboots shooting civilians for like disagreeing with them. That was less on the nose at the time I wrote it than it is
Oh,
now. Um, but
yeah,
yeah, because satire is really hard to do in the modern world.
sure is. Every time. Anyway, yes, you are right. Um, Here's one. You've talked about Melville Scholarship, imagining a future with Hall Scholarship. Which scholarly debates from any of your works are the most fun to imagine?
Oh gosh, I'm gonna. So funnily enough, I don't spend a huge amount of time imagining future scholarship about my work. I think so I do have quite a lot of friends who are academics, and often scholarly debates are really like hyper specific.
Hmm.
And and it's not quite so there's a joke in one of the early Terry Pratchett books where someone's doing their research field on I think the use of the syllable enk in levitation spells at the early confused period, and it'll be stuff like that. Yeah it'll be always so the ones that you do get in Melville scholarship is that there's Melville was on record as saying that he'd like rewritten the book multiple times. Part of the reason there's a lot of stuff woven into Hell's Heart where I talks about having rewritten the book multiple times is because of that aspect of Melville scholarship,
Oh, yeah.
and generally when that like behind the curtain stuff when there is a reference in the book to something having been changed in editing, it really was changed in editing. So I suspect it.
Really?
Generally, yeah. And I do that, and weirdly, that I could see that I can see things like are the things that say they were changed in editing in the books textually things that really were changed in editing being the kind of minute
Yes.
that editors would fixate on. Because the other thing that's interesting is that like I've just done a lot of interviews. I'm on podcasts, so so future scholars will have a lot more to work with.
They will. There is a lot. There is a broad range of uh, information that we will have when the
Mhm.
scholar when the Hall scholarship
Oh, like
begins.
there'll be just a whole thing about like there'll be a big comparative longitudinal study about tag yourselves in the works of like genre fiction authors in the mid 21st century.
See, you're already starting it.
Exactly.
Um, Here's a question. Are there other books that you read during COVID once you finished The Great Read?
Oh gosh, I mean, almost certainly, but nothing's kind of so. I always say part of the reason that I you know review books on Goodreads is because I read a lot and things go out of my head very quickly, especially because
Yep.
I'm often progressing on to the next thing. Um, so while I have the big like obviously nothing had the same like big story vibe of the Moby Dick thing, so I'm sure there was, but it didn't stick in my head in the same way.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Totally fair.
Yeah.
And then someone they also said, are there other books you would recommend? I will send that link to the two interviews that Alexis did, and one of them lists a bunch of books that
You can
they've enjoyed. So
you can also check my Goodreads.
also check Alexis's Goodreads. Okay, so we've done that one. Speaking of the swords and sapphics, they mentioned an upcoming project with Tor.
Yes.
Can you say anything about that?
Is this the this is the magical girls but they're middle aged now?
Yes.
It's magical girls but they're middle aged now. I,
But I think that sounds so cool.
so
Is
it's
that all we can say?
I mean I think I'm more or less allowed to, I can speak fairly freely about it, although it's one of those things where like it's I've submitted the first draft, so literally everything about it could change. It's so the premise is that the heroine was a 90s magical girl protagonist in the 90s, and it's now 30 years later, and the stuff that she fought against as a kid is coming back. So it's about
Okay.
it's like the original the I mean, again, you'll get this story a lot when I do the the interviews. So the sort of the original idea in some ways was about rewatching Sailor Moon actually quite recently, and thinking about the feeling that I think a lot of us have right now, that we are still today refighting battles that we really kind of let ourselves believe we'd won a long time ago.
Yep.
So it's kind of about that.
Well, I can't wait. And I'm super excited that it's going to be coming out. That just sounds, it just sounds glorious. I'm really happy about that.
I'm hoping it'll be fun. I'm hoping people like it. It's, spoilers. It's very different from Hell's Heart
But
because
that's,
it's
I mean, as I've said before, Alexis, the variety of books you write is such a boon to those of us who like to read them. You know, as I said earlier in this conversation, probably wouldn't have picked up this book
hmm.
just because of who I am and what my reading
No,
vibes generally are, and I absolutely loved it.
no, I'm so glad.
I mean, I had so much fun. So anything you choose to write, I will read. It's just a blanket statement. Um, okay, here is a question. Was any film adaptation of Moby Dick among things that might have influenced Tell's Heart?
Oh, well, so obviously I consumed a lot of Dick media. Which is so I did watch in the heart. I think it's called In the Heart of the Sea, which is actually not a Moby Dick adaptation. It's actually about the wreck of the Essex, which
Okay.
which is so the Essex is a real ship that was sunk by a whale in the early 19th century, and the wreck of the Essex is, and Melville's quite open about this, one of the inspirations for the story of Moby Dick. I think it's even referenced in Moby Dick as an example of a time when a sperm whale has wrecked a ship. Um, so I don't think, I can't, I can't think of when the last time they actually did a film adaptation of Moby Dick. There was a stage play around here a little while ago. I meant to go and see it, then didn't, but that's not very helpful. First of all, it's a stage play you wouldn't get an opportunity to see, and secondly, I didn't see
Yeah,
it.
there
Um,
you go.
but no, it's
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So the other thing I will say, if you're looking for Dick media, there's a podcast called the Moby Dick Big Read, which I listen to, which is really fascinating.
Yes.
Because it is a different celebrity doing. I say celebrity. No, sorry, I say celebrity like that's like I'm being dismissive of it. It's a different person, many who are a range of celebrities from the like extremely famous to the not sure who this person is. But it's a different person doing each chapter.
I
The
think
first
that's
chapter,
so cool.
yeah, no, it's really interesting because they have very different interpretations. The first chapter, which I think is Tilda Swinton as well, which is very exciting. I'm a huge fan of Tilda Swinton.
Oh,
Um,
Tilda's amazing.
Tilda's amazing.
That is fantastic.
My favorite person named after a punctuation mark.
Yes, exactly. Um, are there any other classic novels you think would be fun to reimagine in space?
Um, Not off the top of, I mean, sort of hypothetically, yes. In practice, possibly not. In the sense that, like, I don't think necessarily I'm going to do another classic novel in space, although, as always, never say never. Um, what was a? I had a couple of weird ones. Like I did briefly kicked around kicked around the idea of Dracula in space. But I think that might be one step too camp. Although maybe doing it at high camp could be really fun.
Oh
But I think
yeah.
to an extent, reimagining everything in space is always great. Obviously, I'm like Return of the Forbidden Planet is the Tempest in space, and to be fair, it's not a novel, it's a play. But like I think you could do basically any classic in space.
Yeah,
Um,
you could.
yeah.
Absolutely. Here's a question. Having written 30 books now, if you could live or be part of one of the worlds, which one would you choose?
Oh gosh. I mean, so the really cheap answer is any of the contemporaries. So I'm actually quite happy with the world I live in right now. I mean, obviously, I'm also deeply unhappy with the world I live in right now, but my actual life is fine. Um, I do. I think if it had to be one of the fictional worlds, I might go with Fairer the Mysterious Letter just because it's not a dystopia, which helps. Um,
It sure does.
it's a fairly nice, slightly whimsical fantasy world. I
Yeah.
think I can cope with whimsical fantasy world.
Yeah, I can. Oh, I'm all for cozy whimsy fantasy world. Okay, here's one, and I don't know the answer. It's where does the name Moby Dick originate from? In German, it's like two names for fat.
Oh, really?
Do you know?
I oh God, I should have looked this up.
Hang on, Googling.
I I feel like. This is probably something that Marvel scholars have an answer to, but I don't know off the top of my head. I feel like I may have read it somewhere, but then immediately forgotten it. Oh, that's the one. It's Mocha-Dick. Yes, there was a real whale called Mocha-Dick. Thank you, Sarah.
Oh yeah,
Um, yeah.
really?
Yeah. There's a real whale called Mocha-Dick, which is one of the real life things, along with the wreck of the Essex. Um,
There we go.
but
Thank you for the scholarship, Sarah.
there.
Um, Here's a question I'm not quite sure. What's your favorite library?
My favorite library. I don't really have a favorite library. Like my local library is fine. I don't make as much use of my local library as I might, just because I have a sufficient disposable income that I can just buy books. Um, obviously, like kind of, I have some access to like kind of swanky university libraries, which are fun. Um, but I don't think I have assuming you mean like to use as a library. If you mean like as a building,
I'm trying to
then
think.
that's a again a slightly hard one to answer.
Yeah,
Uh, like kind of like because my like and also because I didn't make huge use of my university library when I was at university because I'm a scientist, and so you go in, you get the textbooks that have like the information you need in them, and then you don't have to go back. It's not like people who do like kind of do like English where they have to go and get a new book every week.
yeah. Yeah, I'm
Yeah,
just
once and
pondering
done.
that one myself. And I don't, I mean, there's a uni lib. I mean, one of my university libraries was absolutely beautiful, and I
Yeah,
did love being there. But everybody wanted to be there because it was beautiful. So then it wasn't
yeah,
fun because it was
and then
crowded.
it's crowded. No, it's yeah, no, there's a whole like kind of
Yeah, absolutely. Um, Alexis, I am so delighted to have spent this time with you.
no, it's lovely.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for writing such a wonderful, wide variety of books. Thank you, everybody who joined us for this conversation. It was so much fun. Like I said, I'm going to send a big old follow-up because Mary, you did some yeoman's work there, adding in a bunch of links, and I've taken notes and I will follow up on those. But thanks, everybody, for spending part of your day time zone with us, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time.
Yes, looking forward to it.
Okay.
Thank you
Thanks.
so
Be
much.
well, Alexis.
Bye bye, shall do.
Bye.